Hello, everybody. It's April 12th. We're back for another Node Operator Roundtable. New topic again today. We're gonna be dipping into 5.0. So I'll hand it over to Brian to tee that up. Unless before we get into that, I don't know if we have any 4.0 or other software update.
We do. Yeah, I'll let Stephen take it. We did.
Cool.
Okay, sure. So yesterday evening, we did release RC3. You can access it right there. I think that probably the most notable bits are that we did tackle a number of bugs that you can read inside of the release notes. There's a number of tweaks also around the new feature, read-only transactions. And then one thing that we took a step back on was we're actually reintroducing the speculative read mode. So we're still removing the persistent transactions, but we are reintroducing speculative mode. So those are just some of the, I guess, the bigger take-homes. You can, of course, read through those release notes there, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Following on the heels of that, mentioned a few times that we will be releasing CDTs, RC1, pretty shortly after this release that we were trying to get out. So I anticipate probably early next week at this point. I know it's kind of dragged out a couple of other weeks. But on that note, we do plan to demo some bits of that this coming Thursday. So the one after the one that's tomorrow, that is, inside of a new meeting that we've stood up that is developer office hours. It's kind of the sister meeting for this, in effect, for Antelope developers. Maybe a slight EOS lean there just since it's being driven by the ENF. But we got some good feedback there just this last installation, which was last Thursday, and looking to get that up and running. So really excited about that. And if you have anyone on your team that may be interested in attending something like that, feel free to drop me a line. I'll be helping lead that meeting with Nathan and Bucky from our team. So I think that's about it from our end. I guess the only other thing that I think that's it, actually. Sorry.
And that was going to be a demo, of a new CDT that you're going to be doing in that?
That's correct. Yeah. So kind of like the early vision here, and of course, like we're always trying to like modify our process to make it best serve the community. But the way that I'm thinking of it right now is that similar to how we had that leap focus demo here, I think that that's kind of like the rhythm that we'll have here, but we're hoping to actually do that more frequently, not just like when the release is like dropped at like the front door, but actually when we're actually delivering those features, not materially to a production environment in any way, but whenever we've actually gotten feature complete. And similarly, we're leading in with the developer tooling, primarily leading in from CDT and Dune, wherein we'll be talking about the pain points there inside of that forum, and then also performing demos around CDT and Dune related functionality. The biggest thing that I think we'll be talking about is part of this broader system that we're building out called Antler. The first bit is Antler Proj, which is just like a project and package management system that should really ease just setting up your project. So that's what we'll be cruising through. And again, that will be this next Thursday, a week from tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern, just to keep it at the same time, but just a day later than this meeting. And it'll start off every 2 weeks, but if we get sufficient material and demand and attendance, we may bump it to more of a weekly cadence. We just are getting our baby steps rolling there.
Cool. And to get an invite to that, speak to you, you said? Or is there?
Yeah, I'm the owner of the invite there right now, and I'm happy to incorporate you into that. You can shoot me a telegram at Stephen P. Diesel, or I'm also Stephen.diesel@eosnetwork.com. That's Stephen with a PH in case anyone listens to audio around that. But yeah.
Cool. I'll include those details in a summary for folks who need to find you. Awesome. Thank you. Any questions or comments about Leap 4.0 or the new developer office hours? All right. Well, in that case, I'll hand it over to Brian to talk about 5.0.
Excellent. Excuse me. There's a little bit of a cold going around my house. So yay. Anyway, so bouncing off of what Stephen said there in the spirit of more frequent demos and just more like seeking feedback more proactively. And that's what I want to do with 5.0. So I think the demo last week kind of we didn't have time to sort of take questions and get feedback in that. And so what I want to do moving forward is just like what Steven said for the developer meeting, which is we're going to do demos sort of incrementally as things are dev done, so that we can get feedback on things with enough time to potentially change them if something's wrong. But even to avoid that problem, we're going to do what I want to do first in this slot, which is reviewing proposals, like before there's even really a lot of code written on something, just so that we can get feedback really early. So to kind of open up this discussion for this first topic, in 4.0, we introduced the Prometheus exporter plugin, and got the feedback about it being valuable to be able to run those endpoints on a separate configurable port, basically. And that was it reinforced a theme that has been heard a number of times before, which is it'd be nice if there was more configurability on ports and IPs and whatnot more generally. And so for one of the things that we're planning as a potential inclusion in 5.0, that we have a proposal for now, is a configuration features for more generally being able to set the IP and port and some other fancy things for endpoints that Node.EOS provides. So with that, I'm going to give a quick summary, and then I'm going to ask Kevin if he has anything to add or modify to what I said, and then we'll open it up for questions or feedback. I don't really have anything visual to show, so sorry about that. You'll have to look at my boring face. Here we go. So basically, what we're proposing is a configuration format to let node operators set different addresses for the HTTP endpoints that are provided by Node.EOS. And whoops, sorry, I am reading from notes. So here we go. Goodness gracious.
Is that addresses or ports? You said addresses.
It's both. Of course, I've lost my notes.
Okay.
Yep. So the thing is that we thought it would be too burdensome to have individual configurations for every single individual endpoint. So instead, we sort of categorized endpoints, which we'll go into the categorization in a moment. But and so you'd be able to set those sort of networking details on each category. As far as like what you'd be able to set, you could set host names, IPv4 addresses, IPv6 addresses, ports, or Unix socket paths. And so the goal of this whole thing is that node operators will be able to customize those details, IP addresses, host names, and ports, for different categories of those HTTP endpoints, and be able to do like secure and efficient local only connections with Unix socket paths. That's why that's included. As far as like the categories we're proposing, which maybe I should actually flash my screen up so that people have something they can look at and don't have to try to commit this to memory. Just a moment. There we go. So it's this part that I'm highlighting here. These are the proposed categories, which I can click into the actual plan itself to show you like what's included in those. But high level, get info, chain read-only, chain read-write, net read-only, net read-write, producer read-only, producer read-write, snapshot, trace API, Prometheus, and Node. Before I click into the details on like what endpoints are included there, I'm going to pause and see if Kevin has any details or clarifications that he wants to make sure we address before getting your feedback.
No, I don't think so. I think the main feedback is just, whether you like the whole idea, and then just in specifically the number of categories and what would go into each category if we've got that not quite the way that you would anticipate it looking.
I know I missed the last conversation about it, but what is the current status? We have like one port or like one IP address that we can set, and we can like allow or disallow. Is that like where we are at the moment?
So currently in 4.0, the latest RC, you can put Prometheus on its own port, so there's a separate configuration for Prometheus. Everything else is on the HTTP server address that's configured. And so that includes whatever you enable. So whichever one of the APIs, chain API or producer API or net API, all of those would be on the same port. So what this is suggesting, proposing, is that we set up categories, and these categories would be pretty much aligned with the plugins, although a few of the plugins we split kind of in two, into read-only and read-write, with the idea that we figured it would be useful to split that functionality between those two. So it doesn't go all the way of saying, hey, let's allow you to configure a unique address and port for every single endpoint, which would have been the drafting.
Crazy. Yeah.
The amount of like, I mean, we could do that. It's just like, seems a bit overkill. So instead, and we thought, well, the other idea is we can do it by plugin, but we know like that everybody wants Git info on its own port or separate. I mean, and we've heard that a number of times. And so it's like, okay, that one would want to maybe pull out. Like we could have done that by pulling that into its own plugin, for example. But then it's like, well, what this proposes is just general concept of categories. And then we can put various endpoints in the categories and allow you to configure the categories. And then we could, get feedback on what should be in each of these categories or add new categories.
Can you, in your current thinking, would you be able to have everything on the same port, all categories on the same port?
Yes. So the default would be fall back to everything on the same port.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
You can change individual categories. Like if all you're interested is moving Git info on a different port, you could leave everything else alone and just take Git info and put it on its. We'll put it in its own category, and so would be on a different port.
Nice to have. That's cool. Yeah. Thanks. So the default action will be it responds like it always did, but you can carve them all. An address you can bind to localhost or obviously port, whatever you want.
Right. So you'd be able to configure it either for a Unix path socket configuration, which we support, or IPv4 or IPv6. Now, IPv6 support will be added as part of our work for 5.0. At least that's the current plan, is to add in support for IPv6, which we currently do not have. That would be part of this work as well.
Yeah. From my perspective, this is like a nice to have. Wouldn't have been something on my high priority, but IPv6 that is a priority. Right? The threads and whatnot behind the scenes are still the same, though, correct? This is almost like a proxy kind of in front. If it's a heavy, if like Git info is pretty heavy, I think, right? So that's still rolled into the normal threading with all of the other endpoints.
Yes. So
from a thread.
So all the existing HTTP configuration options would apply across all of these addresses. So there's like max body size, there's number of requests in flight. There's a number of, and like certificate sort of things. All that would be across all the endpoints that are configured. We're not specifying as part of this, unless we get different feedback here. Obviously, we're not suggesting that any of those would be configurable separately per category. That all the existing HTTP configuration options would be across all categories, and that being the same.
Any other questions? Anybody struggling to understand this or anything like that? I want to make sure that
Question: when you said it supports IPv4 or IPv6, is both an option?
Yes. So you'll see line 94 and 95 that the chain read only is specified for two different addresses. Now, again, those are both just local hosts, but that's to illustrate the fact that you can actually list a category as many times as you want, and it would listen on all the various ports or endpoints. And so one could be IPv4, one could be IPv6, et cetera. Or like on line 93, you can configure it to just listen to all of them, right? Well, that's the default one, but you can do that as well. Like say, listen on all endpoints at port 88.
Well, line 93 implies IPv4 there because it's 0000.
True. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure we could come up with a syntax for that for listening on all words.
Just add a third example for that same category of the V6 local host or whatever, and that would kind of indicate it. But
yeah, I think that's what 96, 97 is doing, right? Isn't it IPv6?
oh, that is the V6, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not listing on IPv4, or is it?
Well, you can lift it twice for sure. Like you could do just like 94, 95 lists read only twice. You could have two entries, one for IPv4, one for IPv6. I'm not sure. We could certainly come up with a syntax that would do that as well. Just say, listen on IPv4 and IPv6 on the given port.
Yeah, maybe like star.
Yeah, or something. Yeah.
Well, Aaron has an interesting comment to allow it as a CSV or array or something like that.
Yeah, our current configuration it is this format, and so I don't think, at least as part of this change, we're not suggesting changing our configuration.ini format.
No, it's more about just allowing commas within the original HTTP server address value. Like that would be reverse compatible, and then you could add on IPv4 and IPv6 and socket. All those sockets have their own format.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That way you can do it as just HTTP server address and not have to configure any of the other. I see what you're saying. Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely not changing whole file format.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I see that being useful. That way you don't have to actually put all these categories in. If all you really want to do is listen on all addresses. Yep.
very good. All right, so we did get some feedback from Ross already on like level of importance. He qualified it as a nice to have. I'm curious about other folks weighing in there on level of value of this.
Well, for me, it's great to have the internal producer API on a different port than the external HTTP.
I mean,
An API. Yeah, so you could do snapshots, add, remove connections, or whatever, all that producer stuff separately from whatever I'm exposing to the public, which is, V1 chain. So that's super.
I think from my perspective, I just find it not that important because typically you would have that hosted behind anything public. It's going to be behind a load balancer anyway.
we put it behind a load balancer because we have to limit those types of things. But
So
ultimately, all right.
Sorry, Michael, I'm not trying to talk over you. You
I'm gonna let you talk. No, I'm glad you talk. But the reason I came up with it is that you can go to any node that's running a snapshot, which we do all the time. It's a pain to not be able to run local snapshots, but you can't leave it on because if somebody knows that you have that on and you're not blocking it, they can freeze the node. So being able to carve off or pause a producer or any of that, I mean, the get info and all the other ones, yeah, that's great. I mean, whatever. But really the big one that we brought to light was that damn producer API and how you can jack up your producer or even freeze it with snapshots pretty easily just because you can't even separate it. You never want public APIs to have that type.
Look, I'm sure that this has been covered ad nauseum already, but there's a way to, on your load balancer, to only forward specific requests more than just a port. And there's also certain plugins that can only be enabled. I get where you're coming from. It's nice to have. It's great. I'm just like, it's not going to change. It's not like, oh, this is the feature I've been like hanging out for,
Right. And to Michael's point, just to make sure, it's clear, is like the approach here is we saw that there were specific things where this would be valuable. Like Prometheus Exporter was the first example of it, but also get info has come up that, as Michael's and Matthew said over and over again, is like a thing that you might want to separate off. So rather than trying to go sort of piecemeal with, now let's add that feature for get info, that sort of thing. This is just a generalized solution, which is one of those things that's like, sometimes you get other less valuable things for free if you like tackle the valuable thing in the right way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all good. All good.
Any other questions that Kevin, that you want to make sure you get answered as part of this?
Just if you could look at the categories here, if anybody has any like immediate oh, that doesn't make sense, or I would want this. So these are the categories we're proposing. So get info on its own, chain read only, basically just all the get operations, and then on the chain RW would be all the abilities to push a transaction or compute transaction. Now we do have send read only transaction in the R0 category. So make note of that. So, those are ones to think about. We did split up the net as well, although I'm not sure that would actually be useful, whether you would really ever specify net read only separately. The net read W seems like that would probably all want to be restricted. And the same thing with the producer, we split that up between read only and read write as well. Again, I'm not sure whether that would ever be useful. I don't think you would expose ability to be able to see, for users to be able to see your gray list. I don't know. So maybe it doesn't make sense to have different categories for producer or net. But certainly putting snapshot over on its own, in its own category, I think makes sense. And also note that we're not changing any of the endpoint names. So it would still be V1 producer, even though it's for snapshot functionality, just to keep that backwards compatibility.
And that was a big one too, Ross, whenever we were talking about it, being able to manage your peers. You can't expose that because it kind of got routed into the normal HTTP. And then you had to kill it at the proxy level. So it just allowed Node OS to do it. But that would be another big one in those conversations.
Cool.
Yeah, so if we look at transaction line, the read only.
Are you talking about this one?
No, V1 chain compute transaction.
Oh, right here.
Yes.
So I think
Goes to question about that one.
Why is it in read write? Does it alter the state at all? I thought it doesn't alter the state.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I could definitely see it being pushed in the other category. The main reason I thought of putting it here currently is all the ones above it, all those are capable of running in the 4.0. One of the new features you get is the ability to specify a read window and a write window configuration with a read-only thread pool. And then during the read window, all the operations that are in the chain RO category are able to run in parallel in that thread pool. So that's not true of compute transactions. So even though a compute transaction from a user's perspective does not modify anything, as an implementation detail, it actually does. It actually modifies things in the database and then rolls back those changes. So it's not possible currently to run compute transaction in parallel on a node. It is possible to execute the read-only transactions in parallel on a node. And so that's why those two categories. So my idea of like separating these two categories is, as a node operator, what you could do with 4.0, which would be kind of exciting to do, I think, is that you could have two API nodes. One that sets up the chain and read-write. Of course, you could do this today with 4.0 just using, an external proxy. And I would suggest it might be useful to do that, is that you could set up two nodes. One that processes all the push transactions and the compute transaction endpoints, and just run that in without a configuration, without any read-only threads. Just run it with read-only threads equals 0, keep it in write window the entire time, and it'll basically run just like 3.2 does today. And then you could take another node and you could run it with the read-only threads, maybe crank it all the way up to 8. That's the max we're allowing right now. There's details why that's currently only allowed up to 8. But you could crank that up to 8 and set the read window to, say, 500 milliseconds. And the write window, you can set to 1 millisecond on that node. Because it doesn't really matter when you set the write window to. As soon as a block comes in, it actually interrupts what it's doing, applies the block, and then switches back. So you could set the read window to basically the entire time, the write window to basically nothing, 1, and then it would sit there for the entire time running on those 8 threads in parallel, processing all of these read-only calls. So you could separate out your infrastructure in that way, get potentially much higher throughput. If that makes sense.
Sounds like you need to write it, Kevin.
Thanks.
Yeah,
you're right.
Like that up.
Kevin's badass PP god.
Okay, here's the reason all of these parameters exist. That's probably a reason.
That's it.
Yeah, Brian, we need a place to put that. Where would I put that information?
Yeah, directly in every node operator's head.
Well, I just did that, but yeah, we need to type that up, and I don't know, maybe
Send me an email. I'll publish it.
Okay.
Nice.
No, just go to NodeOS, do an output file, and go through line by line by line by line by line, and just put your comments of why you created that parameter. That'll be perfect.
So I want to call attention to some of the things that Kevin directly called out. So Kevin, it sounded like you had a specific question around the send read-only transaction being part of the chain read-only. Is that right?
Yeah, I was giving a rationale why these categories. Now, I could certainly see from a logical perspective that you might want compute transaction up in the other category. I mean, I can see that making sense. I'm doing it. I did it more from a practicality standpoint in terms of like the configuration I just suggested. But I could certainly see it being, or maybe even like that should be a separate category altogether. Maybe it should be chain compute or whatever. That's the kind of feedback. If we could, I don't know if you shared a link to this. If you guys could take a look at these categories and think through like, yes, this makes sense, or no, this should be in this other category, or this is important enough that I would want it in its own category. That's the type of feedback I think we're looking for.
Yeah, and just hopping in right quick from a process perspective, I think it's a goal of ours as these proposals come together moving forward that it would be great to have people comment directly on these PRs that are submitted. That's kind of the process as it is, or had started off, is inside of the product repo, new proposals will be submitted, and there's opportunities for the community to interact as much as they please. So that's a great way to get ahead. And of course, we'll still be talking about it in these meetings, but it's a great way to get some of that context asynchronously.
The other thing you called out was, I think you were asking the question of whether it's valuable for net and producer to have separate read-only, read-write. So let's take this one by one. Net, do folks prefer it be more granular like this, or prefer?
Was that the question, or was it why have net as two separate groups versus grouping them as one? I thought that was the
that's
could be wrong.
That's what I was saying. Yeah. So should we keep it separate like this, or just group it as one?
I see as one makes sense because like this is going to be enabled for the node operator and not necessarily like exposed publicly. So you'd want to bind it as just a local host or something.
Well, maybe not. I'm wondering, okay, so like we've got the Node EOS monitoring thing that, one of the teams here is working on, which is great. So maybe you want people to be able to look at the status of something, but not be able to control it. So looking at who's connected, but not enable the actual making connection changes. So I think that's separated.
Okay, I could see that. I could even see like just on an internal level from a sort of principle of least privilege kind of perspective or something, right? Like maybe you'd want to do that for your own internal nodes as well.
Okay. I guess for the monitoring, you might want to have the monitoring enabled publicly, or at least to, like an IP on your LAN, for example. So anybody can access it with their, Grafana or whatever they're using. And then have the connect, like you said, specified only to local host, or like basically where the node operator only can access it.
Yeah.
So that's how we have it, right? So if there's 3 levels of access in our network, there's the public stuff that's enabled through the public load balancer. There's if you're on the internal LAN access, and then if you're SSH into the machine itself access, right? So we could, the public things that's at the top of the list is off the screen. We're gonna make that available everywhere. Then the net read only, we might make that available to certain IP addresses that's used for monitoring. And then the read write, well, you have to access SSH into the machine to make a big change, because then we have the permission. Because none of these APIs have a permission level with a password or whatever, right? They're just open or not. So you need to be able to restrict who's allowed to make changes, and you can do that by who's allowed to SSH into that machine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have to think about organizations that have like, say 100 employees, and different employees have different levels of access, and not just, we just have one node operator who's managing it. So that's why I like it the way it is listed here.
So question in the same spirit then for the producer, read only, read write. Is it better to keep them separated like this, or is there no reason to do that?
Same reason, I guess. As net.
Yeah, it follows the same reasoning to have them both separate for access control.
Yep. And another little justification, this one's maybe a little bit weaker, but like configuration like this is probably kind of more of a one and done type of thing. And so the extra flexibility comes at very minimal extra complexity for node operators who would be using this config. So, okay. I think we've probably covered enough on this. Anything else we should go into on this before I move on?
See the chat. I get supported APIs, right? So we have an endpoint that allows you to see which APIs are supported, but now what? Now these APIs are maybe internal, external, whatever. So in our implementation, we actually filter the get supported APIs based on what we've allowed through the firewall or the load balancer. right? So we take get supported APIs, remove everything that's not V1 chain, and then publish that list as what's available, which is, a bit manual to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. This proposal doesn't mention that at all, and actually just says to put it on a separate port. But yeah, I agree. I think it makes sense for it to be supported on each configured port to tell you what's on that port. I mean, that seems like what it should do. And of course,
or we get rid of it, but somebody asked for it originally, so that's why it's there.
I think.
And I'm
Yeah,
I
we use
that
it.
I don't understand the proposal, Kevin. So you're saying each port would just basically respond differently to that call.
correct. So as the proposal's written, it remains and it just returns like everything. I mean, the other option, which I don't think we'd want, is that like you could keep it on its own port and it would return all the information on what ports are on. But that seems like an anti-feature. You wouldn't want users to be able to see that information. So it seems like what it ought to do with what Matthew just described, is kind of what they're doing manually, is that it should just, according to whichever of the configured endpoints you hit, it tells you, it pretends like that's the only endpoint there is, and tells you on that endpoint what's available.
Is it configurable, or is it still just only going to look at what's bound to it? Because what we run into is the node is going to respond, but it's not always aware of all the features that it actually should respond with. So you end up going in there and saying, no, I do offer history, just not on this node, because that's the one you're going to call to. What a lot of us did is we put a static JSON and said, you don't even ask the node anymore. You get the answer that I want you to get, at the proxy level. But not that it's directly in there, but that was another piece of that. And it burned us on supporting Aaron, because I think they do it manually because they have Frankenstein. But, he'll ask our nodes, and it'll say we don't do it, even though we do it. It's just through Hyperion.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think we would entertain like allowing you to provide
about a static JSON. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I
just say answer with this.
Yeah. No. In my mind, like once you've kind of stepped over that threshold where you're providing third party outside of EOS capabilities, then it seems like
it's not third party. It's additional node features that node isn't aware of that it needs to be on. Anyway,
but now the Hyperion proxy thing should handle that and not be a Node EOS feature. I think that's what Kevin's saying.
Yeah, I think so.
Intercept it, mutate it, provide it.
Yeah, send it back based on here's the list that's available. Plus, I added V1 history to the list.
I've requested it from that side as well. Don't think that hasn't been, but yeah, that was always an issue. But it also, whenever you have multiple nodes providing different things, if they answer from this one, it's not going to know that actually maybe I do offer my peer status information. It's anyway, that was another piece of that conversation. I'm totally cool with, it's not going to happen that way. I do agree with you. It needs to be respective to the port and the endpoints that it's got related to this config file. And more so what here. Right.
I think what this will let us do is right now, all of us, if we modify the response, we're removing things. Like we're like, oh, it's reporting that, but we block it, so we remove it.
Right.
What this will do is let us, like, let's say we had 3 upstreams in our load balancer, whether it's different machines or whether it's different ports here, instead of removing things and then hosting it statically, what we can do in the load balancer is just combine that JSON. Like, our 3 upstreams have different capabilities, but okay, let's just call all 3 upstreams, combine that JSON, and then cache it. There's no more static and removing. It would be a process of just merging everything that we do offer out of that, unless you are going granular enough as to where you're blocking something out of one of those categories. But I think everything that I've removed is now broken into those categories, so I wouldn't have to remove. Maybe somebody else has an example of something they still would remove out of one of those categories. I don't know, but
which would be
This kind of does offer us that merging strategy.
It's merging. I like that. That's a good idea. And much better automating type of aggregate.
Yeah, I mean, my current thing just goes, if it's V1 chain, let it through. If it's not V1 chain, remove it. So it kind of matches the chain list that was on the screen.
very good. All right.
What happened to DB size? We didn't talk about that one.
Oh, yeah, it's not in the list or categorized at the moment.
Oh yeah, we missed it. Forgot about it, I guess.
Where would it fall if it's not in the list? I'm curious. Does it just roll back to the standard chain? The government was levying?
I would hopefully we would have noticed it when we were doing it, but yeah, if not, yeah, it would just be on the default HTTP server address.
Is that one that would make sense to have its own category or to be added into one of these other categories?
I think it could be, well, I don't know. It could be added to like the producer read only.
Yeah, maybe it's like an admin. It's an internal admin thing. It's nothing that
What
a
was
public would
it?
need to see.
What was it? Because I wasn't involved with that problem. That triggered, don't run this publicly because it'll get abused or can cause a problem. I know it's
Just
always
security. Don't export it if you don't need to. That's the only reason.
Yeah. So it's more just the data, not, it doesn't have like they can freeze your node for 10 minutes.
No, I don't
Hey,
think so.
Disconnect all your peers types of things. Okay.
It's more from this node has this much RAM allocated to it. So if I just increase the chain X, then I can crush your node because I know how big it is. Right. That's really that.
Yeah. It's not like they would know how much RAM is there anyway. Do you need it if you have it going to like the Prometheus or something along that line? Do you still need the DB Sans plugin? That was just the only way to get it. But
I use this.
Mr. Michael arguing for removing things because there's a Prometheus plugin. That's not what I expected to hear from you.
yeah, Michael, I don't want you to remove anything at the threshold thing.
Yeah.
So that my number one feature request, can I put a random feature request in there? Lower or raise that default percentage threshold of that.
Change it to a static number now. So
You can change it, but the default's still going to be this crazy. It's going to be 99.9999. That's what it needs to be. Anyway, I maybe forget. What I was saying was we're starting to expose other doors for us to get this type of admin information out. Maybe I'll call it again info 2. We've got the Prometheus exporter. You could parse it if you wanted it.
yeah,
The only way before was to use HTTP endpoints. So that's why all these existed. And then it was like, oh shit, you got to lock these down because you don't want, everybody doing it. But if it's just data and it's not an actual switch or control, if there's a way to get it out, maybe that because it's a whole separate little endpoint and you have to deal with it.
So, Michael, I actually like your comment here because I think if we have get info 2, or what I'm calling it get server info, which is the get info plus extra stuff that's meant for the node operator, not for the user, then putting DB size into get server info would be perfectly reasonable.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Get server info is the one that you want to separate. At the beginning of Brian's list, he had get info on a separate thing. Really, you want that as get server info, which is the internal one. And get info is the one that's available publicly in the
I thought about that because, like I say, we want to kind of separate some of that, but get info is heavily used programmatically to figure out, all right, here's the baseline.
Yeah. So the public get info should be with the chain read only stuff, and get server info should be a separate one for node operators on a separate port, which has the DB size included. What do you think?
What else would be on get server info? That's not on get info.
Whatever Michael's list of things is, that seems reasonable.
I don't know if it's in the Prometheus plugin, but in get server info, it would be in a JSON queryable format.
Like it's like the configuration, right? Config.ini exposed get
Right.
server info.
That's why I've mentioned Prometheus plugin, because that's the first type of door for that. But ultimately, just being able to expose it. But that is a valid point. That my thought was when I saw that first one on the list, I was like, I'd love to carve off GitInfo, because I think it's a heavy call too, right? I mean, and they just
Is it?
just constant. I think in relation to some of the other things, I thought that, or maybe it's not. Maybe
I don't know. We cached get info for 1 second.
I think I thought I remember saying, because that we aggressively monitor it, because that's our only way to monitor a server. And it's like, when it really comes down to it, it flows in a super cheat call, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's whatever. The point was, we were never going to be able to remove that from our public APIs. But that's not the get info that really needs to be isolated in that type of mode. It's a better one. Get server info.
Or maybe get server info as parameters, or maybe it's multiple calls, depending on whether you want the Node EOS config ini versus DB size versus some other.
And that's where we would report DB size. That's where we would report free space, if you wanted to be able to, provide some of those other metrics. A lot of the examples from Prometheus, because those are the things we want to monitor.
Yeah, although I saw a proposal for the Prometheus plugin to not monitor OS-related stats, because that should be done with the Node exporter.
I'm fine with that, but that gray area in the middle, tell me what's in the damn config file that I'm having to parse, or tell me what those block logs have, which is in the get info now, but not under ship, right? And won't be, but those types of things.
And can I just add, and I know that you guys might have discussed this already, I'm sure you have, but as another little special thing, all of these cool queries, make sure they happen on a different thread to Node.js, like the Node.js, like APIs and block production, that kind of thing.
Well, that's what I was saying, is getting get info off on a different thread, I thought was a concern because it got hammered and was heavier. But I mean, Aaron deals with more get infos than probably any other man on this earth, and Matthew probably second. So I trust his opinion of
I think the reason to split it off is because it's like the bare minimum API you want on every server. So that way you could use it as even a monitoring for an upstream. I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want get info available on an API.
Well, and a more advanced get info. But that exactly. What's in get info, because of what it is just a limited amount. But there's you could expose, like we do with our thing now, the earliest block available. Yes, in your upstream logic, be able to say, oh, nope, that one doesn't have it. I need to go to this one that does, whatever type of thing. Think ship logs, right? I mean, being able to expose what's in this node's ship logs versus things like that. Does that make sense? But not the get info, the get info to it, I call it.
Yeah, so just to make sure I are synthesized correctly here, it sounds like there's a desire to collapse some of the existing information into one call with what's provided in get info, and maybe add some additional information. And that would be something that you would want on its own separate category. However, get info itself, like as it stands today, is something that you would pretty much always make public, and therefore could be added to the producer read only, or sorry, not producer read only, what was chain read only category. Is that right?
Read only.
Yeah, I'm not sure Aaron agreed with that.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. I'm not sure if I picked it up right or not. So.
Although maybe on the nodes where you want to expose the get info, but not the chain API, do you actually have the chain API actually enabled at all?
I would, like on our peers, for example, I'd love to just be able to have get info available, like as an HTTP request to, no other APIs. So
what's funny, what Aaron had said, I thought was a reinforcement of what I said, but now I'm seeing it's the opposite. He's saying there are times when you would want almost nothing but get info enabled.
Yeah, that's why I put it in its own category. Was that that case? It's like, okay, if it really let's say even on your producer node, you might want get info, but nothing else, enabled. So you just enable that one category with enable.
Yeah, and then I started a discussion that took it in a different direction, which said maybe we want something different. So maybe that's not the right direction. But anyway, we need to figure out what to do with DB size because it's missing.
Right. So we'll add that as I think as its own category, at least as a first idea there. And then the other thing I heard, I think, is that like get info should be in two categories. It should be in its own category, and it should also just be included in chain read only, right? Am I hearing that? If you're enabling chain read only, everything else in there, you're going to want get info as well.
If it's not specified, it just rolls into the default though, doesn't it? I mean, it gives you the ability to only offer it on an endpoint, but if you don't specify it, it would be available and responding like it does right now, right?
Well, correct, but you'd have to specify both. I'm just saying if all you did was specify chain read only is on this port, it would just be included in that category. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Or should it be treated like get supported APIs and that it's always available on all endpoints?
Exactly.
Oh, get info. It's that important, and you just always have it on every endpoint.
I don't know. I'm not.
I don't see the harm in it being available on all of them. So if you just enable any other, like let's say you just enable the snapshot API, you'd probably want get info available too, so you could like see where the chain's at on that service.
Okay, that's fair. When you're talking to something, you're probably, it's good to be able to assume. My first question was to that. Therefore, the second one would be back to the same spot without having to know to go to a different port or service address. If it's a light call, like I say, if you're able to expose it in that part of it.
All right. Maybe you leave it at there, so food for thought, and then you guys can think about it and see where.
I tend to agree with Aaron on that because I have some services where I have to split and have two configs. I have to, I talked to that one. But you want chain info? Nope. Got to go over to this address server to get the info. Damn, it's nice when you can just say, can I just ask you?
Since we're here and talking about APIs, I know one Stan has asked for a long time ago was, return a 200 OK versus non-200 OK if the chain is in sync or something like that. So that makes it very easy for a load balancer without doing any programming to know whether to include that node in the load pool.
Correct. Most load balancers check simple. Is it there? Is it not? It responds with the 200. It's just got out of date information. The node knows it's behind. It's in scramble sync mode, but it's still saying, oh yeah, we see it a lot when we query a producer schedule and somebody's got a replay node in the mix. All of a sudden it thinks the schedule was from a year ago because an API served out a table state from a year ago because it's catching up from a recovery snapshot, something like that. But yes, the fact that
knows that on get info it should do that, or are you saying like on every?
No, I'm saying a new endpoint probably. I'm probably mixing them.
Yeah. Ready, got it. Okay, that works. All right.
It is ready or something. V1 chain is ready. Whatever.
Yeah, correct. Some way of it knowing, hey, I'm responding. And you could even query me because I know we write scripts to keep watching it to see where it's synced, right? I mean, I'm not watching the Gelf logs or anything, but knowing if I turn that HTTP on and don't put it on another port, my load balancers are about to start routing and people are going to go nuts because they're getting old data and you think it's valid, unless you're extra checking.
Correct.
And every transaction push to it's going to be expired because it's really old data.
Right.
It's almost like a health endpoint or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it is a health endpoint. Correct.
And I know it knows a difference between I'm really behind and I'm kind of behind. because there is this, I mean, those nodes can kind of lag behind and get out of sync, and you don't want to just shut them down because it's 2 seconds behind. But yeah, my thought had always been, why the hell does it reflect? It doesn't do it when
It's a threshold.
It's in catch-up mode.
No, I mean, I'm just saying this health endpoint needs a configurable threshold to say what it is, right? So by default, it's, I don't know, 30 seconds or something.
What's the threshold for, I'll call it scramble sync mode, whenever it's bulk syncing peer-to-peer versus rapid syncing, in that, maybe that's the parameter that can help drive that? Because it definitely changes from like 1,000 blocks
Swing fire.
Yeah, that's LIB is actually what
Oh,
the way to think one way until it's LIB and then it thinks a different way.
I never realized it was still lib that was triggered then. I just knew it bulk shifted over. All right. Anyway, so yes, a configuration option at some threshold to say, give me the ability to just simply know, do I route requests or not?
And so the reason I'm bringing it up now is because we're talking about these HTTP endpoints, which might be available on all the ports, right? And this might be one of them. Or maybe not. I don't know.
All right. Well, we are at time, so we've kind of gone into what the next topic would have been. So that's good. But I want to kind of give some homework. There will be a pop quiz on the next meeting. Just kidding. But basically, I do want to, as we're sort of at the start of release planning for 5.0, I want to seek, feedback from the community and node operators as a particular part of that around what, what your dreams are for 5.0. So things to think about, of course, are, just sort of the stuff that are constantly causing you pain. Also think about how might we reinforce the things that make Antelope special, right? Are there features that would help us scale more, perform better, have better interoperability with other blockchain things, provide, meaningful new capabilities, drive adoption, drive utilization, carve out more of a unique sort of niche in the overall blockchain ecosystem, all these sort of big, grand things. I'm inviting you to think about those. And I'd like to discuss those next time, just to collect some of those thoughts so that they're not just in your head, and potentially could feed into things to include in 5.0 or a later release.
Higher resource monitoring threshold.
Not right now. I don't want to hear it. No, I'm just kidding.
Put it on the record.
Only because it's
Remember it.
Yeah, but I will, sort of put that call out into the both the Antelope dev and the node operator sort of groups as a reminder. So anyway, with that,
if there's a dozen people I just spoke for that validate that request.
Oh no, I know it's not one that comes with everything. I'll hand it back to Dan. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for your input. And we'll see you next week to talk about your hopes and dreams for 5.0. So have a great day and a great week, everybody.
Cheers, team.
Okay.